I tend to wander, though. So if I get away from the microphone and you can't hear me, let me know. But normally, most people can hear me without much difficulty. Well, I guess I could. No. We are so glad to be here and have visitors with us. I'm trying to remember who's been to Diana. David, have you been to Diana singing? Raymond has. I don't see Raymond tonight. I know he has. Anyway, we're so glad to have Brother Ron Hayes with us tonight. He is almost one of the originals at the Diana singing. He goes way back from Florence, and he and Brother Tom Holland go back for many years. And he's one of the ones that leads the kickoff songs down there. And we were privileged to be there Friday. And, of course, they had about 5,500 there this time. And if you haven't been, like I say, you got to go. The next time will be September. And we're glad that he's here with, tell me your name again. Linda Kelly, good, from Dallas. And they're passing through. And I hated to disappoint him because he thought he was coming to hear Mike. And then Mike's a long way from here. But we're glad that they're with us. And Mike texted with me earlier today, and they're doing a great work. He is teaching for about 3 hours. Students that have come from the preacher school down there to the town where they are. And Mike is teaching about 3 hours, and then Roger's teaching about 3 hours to the preacher students. And then they're having gospel meeting in the evening. So they're doing a great work, and we're glad that they are there doing that. And I assure you, Mike will be through. Has now been moved from ICU to a room in Baptist East. And when I was there today, they were going to do a CT scan on her. In fact, they were taking her down then. She has a lot of health problems, but this surgery was very extensive. And she's doing okay. It's just going to be quite a while for her to recover from it. But the CT scan, Jerry called me later and said they got good news from that the problem they thought might be existing turned out to be a fluid buildup that the doctor said they could take care of that very easily. They were concerned that there might be more of a problem than there was. So I want to continue to remember her. Also, Jonathan Vanderpool went home yesterday and is doing much better. And those were the last two that we have in the hospital at the moment. Now, Sheila Patel, that's Carolyn's sister, is still in the hospital in Birmingham. Tomorrow or a week? Tomorrow? Oh, well, she's done better than anticipated because they first thought it'd be 2 weeks, didn't they? Yeah, well, that's right. Time moves on, doesn't it? Well, we're glad that she is doing better. Glad that Pete's better, and he's able to be with us tonight. And anyone else that I'm either not aware of or we need to update? Oh, that's right. Norman Falk's brother died yesterday, and the funeral is tomorrow at 2 o'clock in Mason, Tennessee. Yvette's going to get that on the calling tree to give them the details, but I do know it's 2 o'clock tomorrow afternoon at Mason. Okay, anyone else that we need to mention perhaps I'm unaware of, or remind me of someone that I should know about? Okay, well, before we begin our study, let's go to God in prayer, and we'll ask David, would you lead us in prayer to start our class, please?
Father, we thank thee for this day with its many blessings. We thank thee for this opportunity to assemble here to study thy word. We thank thee for thy church in this place. May it continue to grow and be a beacon in this community for others, and others may be brought unto thee. Be with those that have been mentioned that are sick. May them be restored to health. Be thy will. Forgive us for our sins. I pray in Christ's name. Amen.
Thank you. Last week we had Vacation Bible School, and so we didn't have our regular study where we've been in Matthew. But 2 weeks ago, and honestly I don't remember where Mike left off because I was having to teach another class, as I recall. So did he finish chapter 24? Are we in 25 now, Matthew? Of what? 24? Okay, so didn't completely finish 24. Okay. All right, well, I'll tell you what we're going to do. We'll look at a couple of things there, and then I may observe the Passover for a few verses and let him pick back up. We'll see. But, okay, let's go to verse 35. Now, I know he clearly showed us there is a line of demarcation there, isn't it? Heaven and earth shall pass away, but my word shall not pass away. But of that day and hour knoweth no man, no, not the angels of heaven, but my Father only. Now, here in Matthew 24, and verses 35 and 36, he has concluded dealing with the destruction of Jerusalem, you remember. All those signs that he's mentioned leading up to the destruction of Jerusalem. The other question he now is going to address is the end of time, isn't he? Well, you remember in the discussion, in what we have recorded there in 34, up to this point, the word days is plural. You remember? Many days. Now, he speaks of a day. In fact, a day and an hour, doesn't he? There will be a day when he will return. We'll meet him in the air. And what's going to happen to this old world here? It will be burned up, won't it? So that being the case, he now begins to deal with the day and hour he mentions in verse 36. Jesus say here himself? Who? No one, no, not the angels, but who only? The Father. So at that time, when Jesus was on earth, he did not even know, did he? And he states that. Well, what about all these prognosticators that have been saying for ages, all these supposed dates? They claim to know more than the Lord did himself, don't they? And of course, they don't. And many of them have. You know, you might think the law of averages might eventually, someone's going to be living when the Lord returns, aren't we? Someone. Now, whether we are, I don't know. But somebody, you know, if you got up this morning and you said, the Lord is coming back today, well, you've got about, 5 more hours to be right. But if you did that every day for the rest of your life, you might hit it, mightn't you? And if you don't, and you leave this world like most of us probably will, in death, if someone keeps doing that, some way, sometime down the road, they'll hit it, won't they? But they don't know. We don't know. But what should we be doing? All right, be ready. Be ready. And that's what we're going to get into in chapter 25 particularly. And you have the parable there of the 10 virgins, don't you? The bridegroom, the 5 prepared, had oil, and the 5 didn't. And we read the door was what? Shut. And you remember back in Noah's day, in fact, he's going to mention Noah here. After all those years of Noah preaching and preparing the ark, One day came eventually, didn't it? And they entered the ark, and we read what? The Lord shut the door, didn't it? Jehovah shut the door. The door is going to close on all of us one day, isn't it? Whether in death or when he returns, this life will end one way or the other. Yes, sir.
Verse 14 says, in this gospel of the kingdom will be preached to the whole world for testament of all nations. That was accomplished, wasn't it?
You were talking about back in verse 14? The gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world for a witness unto all nations. Then shall the end come. Well, at that point, you're still talking about the destruction of Jerusalem, you see. But, well, yes, Paul says it was, but whether that may have been hyperbole or whether it literally was is debatable. Some think it was. Some think Paul was using hyperbole there. The situation, though, is this. Notice in verse, this generation shall not pass. Help me out. What verse am I looking for? 14, isn't it? Then shall the end. No, I'm looking for the word, the generation. No, it's in 34. It's here. It's not moved. Here it is. Yes, 34. Verily I say, this generation shall not pass till all these things be what? Fulfilled, come to pass. So that seals it up, doesn't it? That generation, those people. Who is speaking? Jesus. Who is he speaking to? Remember? Go back to verse 1 of 24. Jesus went out and departed from the temple. His disciples came to him to show him the buildings of the temple. Now, Jesus says to them, see not all these things? Do you not see these things? Verily I say, there shall not be one stone left upon the other that shall not be thrown down. Now verse 3. As he sat upon the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately. Now notice, there obviously were many disciples. And they were saying, in essence, Lord, look at this magnificent complex here. And what does he say? As though they were informing him of something, he said, there's not going to be a stone left. Then his disciples, notice, privately, tell us, when shall these things be? What shall be the sign of your coming and the end of the world? So you see, he's answering some of his disciples in a private session, you see. So always remember who's speaking and who is being spoken to. So we got to keep the things in context. Then when you get to 34, this generation, who's he speaking to? Those same disciples in a private conversation. And he's saying, your generation, this generation, will not pass until what? All these things be fulfilled. Then he goes on to say, heaven and earth will what? Heaven and earth. What does that leave? All this universe is going to be gone. But my word will not pass away. Is he giving them a guarantee, an assurance that what he's saying is going to be true, factual, and happen? Then he says, of that day and hour. And here you begin the day singular. There's going to be a day. You know, the destruction of Jerusalem transpired. It was finalized in AD 70. But the siege actually began about 66, you recall. They were under siege for about 4 years, until it was finally destroyed. That was over a period of days, wasn't it? But when the Lord returns, it'll be what? A day and even an hour. Pretty specific, isn't it? But when will that occur? We don't know. So he goes on to say that. And then he uses Noah. Verse 37, as the days of Noah were. My Father only knows, Jesus says, when he's talking to these men, these disciples, you remember. But as the days of Noah were, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. Well, what was happening in the days of Noah? All right, he's building an ark, but he's preaching, warning, telling what's going to happen. There was going to be a day when the flood came, wasn't it? There was going to be a day when the Lord shut the door, and their opportunities to be in the ark were not sealed no longer, right? As in the day of Noah, so shall the coming of the Son of Man be. What does he continue to say? For as in the days that were before the flood, they were eating and drinking. What's going on? Normal daily activity, isn't it? Eating, drinking, marrying, and giving in marriage. You think there could even have been a marriage on that day when they all had the opportunity to get in the ark, but only Noah, his wife, and his sons and their wives. Normal activities. He said, as in the days of Noah, before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day. Now notice, you see there was a day when the door was shut. They got on the ark, and Noah entered into the ark, and knew not until the flood came and took them all away. So shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. Will we be just having normal activities? Yeah, no signs. It might be as we are right now on a Wednesday evening. And the trump shall sound. You know, we sing a lot of songs that when the trumpet of the Lord shall sound, and time shall be what? No more. And the roll is called up yonder. Who's going to be there? Every one of us said, we'll be there. There will be that day. We don't know when. Our responsibility is to prepare for it. Now, let's jump over. I want you to go with me over to chapter 25. We'll let Mike pick up wherever he wants to in here. But I want us to look at something. Look at verse 13 of chapter 25. Watch, therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour when the Son of Man comes. Now, he has just given this parable of the bridegroom, you know, and the 10 virgins. 5 prepared and 5 unprepared. You do not know the day nor the hour, but is it going to come? Yes. Do we know the day or the hour of our death? We don't know. We don't know. We don't know when the Lord will return. But as it is appointed unto man once to die, and then what? The judgment. You can be sure of it. So, whether we meet him in the air, when he returns, or whether we're in the grave and the graves open up and we meet him in the air. And so shall we ever be with the Lord. It's going to come. There will be a day, and there will be an hour. It's that for certain. Now, let's look at verse 14 of chapter 25. For the kingdom of heaven is as a man traveling into a far country. Now, these parables, notice, as a man traveling into a far country. As, you get the picture, a metaphor. As a man traveling into a far country, called his own servants and delivered to them his goods. So what's the picture Jesus is painting here? A man is traveling into a far country. His goods he puts in possession or guardianship of another, doesn't he? It's what he's setting the picture here. One he gave 5 talents to. Another he gives 2. Another he only gives the 1. To every man according to his what? Individual ability. Now, in their day and time, of course, talent was a type of money or amount. But the goal of the illustration, the parable, is being responsible and prepared and ready. So in our day and time, we think, when we use the word talent, what do we normally think of? All right. What ability the individual may have. Are some people more talented than others in some ways or other? Yes. Well, what are we to do with whatever talent, ability we have? All right. Use it. When does that start? As soon as you're able, right. You know, last Sunday, the first and third Sundays, yeah. Those little fellows that fill this pew up here, and Jared and them are singing and teaching them things. Can little fellows learn? Yes. Can little fellows even teach us things? Did the Lord use children to teach us humility? And those little fellas, you know yourself, every one of us, they've got ears like elephants. They got memories better than you and I have. We may have one time. And what they hear and see is indelibly marked there, isn't it? You ever said something, didn't think anything about it, and a day or two later, one of those little children or grandchildren said it, and you said, where did that come from? And it came from us originally, didn't it? Good or bad? Hopefully the good. But talent, ability, responsibility, opportunity, and ability, when they meet, form responsibility, don't they? Well, Jesus is using this illustration of a man who goes to a far country. Now, if you think about it, Jesus is still here when he's speaking to his disciples here, is he not? But where, in fact, in just a few days, this is the last week, you know, of him on this earth before he's crucified. And he will die, won't he? And then about 50 days later, he ascends back to the Father, doesn't he? He goes to a far country, doesn't he? He himself leaves. Here he's using an illustration of a man who leaves and goes to a far country. And he gives his servants the responsibilities according to their individual ability. And he takes his journey. Then we read in verse 16, he that had received the 5 talents went and traded with the same and made other 5 talents. So what does he do? He uses what is entrusted to him to make more or gain more for his Lord, the one he's under. Keeping in mind, this is Jesus speaking. Whatever talents or abilities we have, we are to use them to the glory of God, aren't we? Whatever it may be. Some I have had people tell me, well, you know, I just don't have any talent. Oh, yes, you do. You do. We all do. And is it possible for a person who initially, have you ever been, remember when the first time you did anything, especially getting up in front of people, were you a bit nervous? Were you a bit uneasy? Yeah. Over time, does it get easier? Until you have someone who is a teacher and an expert in what they do sitting in the audience, and you try to lead singing in front of them. But I never will forget something Brother N.B. Hardeman, I wasn't there, but I was told what he said. One of his students years ago was up to preach, and Brother Hardeman walked in and sat down in the back there, and this former student saw him, and he said, before we actually got started, he saw him. He said, Brother Hardeman, would you come and preach? And Brother Hardeman said, no, I came to hear you. And he said, you'll have no more sympathetic listener than me. So that put him a little bit more ease, you know. But we all have to learn, and what's the substitute for experience? There is none, is it? There is none. The only way you gain by experience is to do it. Yeah. And the Lord knows that. Does He expect of you or me more than I am capable or you're capable of doing? But does He expect us to do all that we are capable of doing for as long as we can? Even some who are very reluctant feel ill at ease, and we sympathize with them. And we want to encourage them. And I know, and I'm sure every one of us in here had someone, and most likely more than just one, who have been a great encouragement to us, haven't they? Even when we tried and we were disappointed with ourselves in our efforts. And any of you, like myself or Mike, any of us, who try to teach, preach, lead singing, or do anything of that nature, sometimes it does not go as well as we would like. Sometimes we don't feel as good. And I can tell you for a fact, and Mike can too, and others, when we tried to prepare and thought we were prepared the best we could be, we're disappointed in our efforts. And other times when we thought we were not doing a very good job, others commended us, encouraged us, and helped us. We all can be encouragers, and that is a talent, whether you recognize it or not. We all can be encouragers. And when we have someone tell us, and I've mentioned this before, but it's so true. When we teach or we preach, we all like to be complimented, don't we? But you know what makes us feel better than anything is when someone tells us, that helped me. I learned something. You helped me. That's what we're trying to do, really, isn't it? We're trying to help. We're trying to learn. And the Lord knows that. He's got His disciple. What does the word disciple mean? A learner, a follower, a student. We all are, aren't we? Now, as Christians, we have the obligation to do so. But isn't it great and good when we desire to do so? You know, we have several who are school teachers. And some of us were not very good students years ago, not nearly as good as we should have been. And in spite of our lack of interest at times, some of our teachers helped us, didn't they? Even took us aside and coached us, helped us, encouraged us. Rare it is that a person only is converted by only one person. Most of the time, it's going to be more than one person involved. It may only be the influence, and don't minimize that at all. I have people tell me, you know, I don't really know how to teach an individual in a home Bible study or something. Well, we've all been there. We've all had to try to learn. And we're all trying to get better. And we learn by observation, do we not? If we watch, that's what we did as children, wasn't it? We learned by observation and listening. And the same is true today. Jesus knows that. Why did he take his disciples, these 12 men, the apostles, and have them with him for about 3 years or so? Remember Acts chapter 1? All that he began both to do and teach. He went about doing good. They are learning. Here they are. Jesus takes illustration, things that they are familiar with. Some of them were fishermen. You had a tax collector. You had a group of men from various backgrounds, didn't you? But they all had one thing in common. They had all been with Jesus. Who's the master teacher? He is. So he uses this illustration of a man who gives his goods to these various men, one with 5, one with 2, and one with 1. And he takes his journey. The one in verse 16 that had received 5 talents went and traded. Notice, he went and he's trading. Is he working? Is he doing something? Yes. What's the Lord going to be, what's he trying to accomplish here in this illustration? Well, he's going to be leaving them himself shortly, isn't he? What does he expect them to do? He's going to give them the Great Commission, isn't he? In chapter 28, he tells them, "Go ye therefore and make disciples of all men, teaching them to, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to do what? Observe all things whatsoever I have commanded you. They're to do the same." Matthew 28, 18 through 20, you recall. So he's preparing them. And they are to do what he's telling them here. These men, they are to be trading, working to make more. Likewise, in verse 17, he that received 2, he gained other 2. The other had gained 5. This man gains 2. Did the 2-talent man do the same thing that the 5-talent man did? He did. Well, you may say, well, wait a minute. The 5-talent man ended up with 10, didn't he? The 2-talent man has 4 now, right? They did the same thing. They accomplished what they could. They took what they had and they used it. Now we read in verse 18, "But he that received 1 went and digged in the earth and hid his Lord's money." So we know what each one's done. Now, the one, he goes, buries it, doesn't he? What's he going to get in return? No. After a long time, now notice verse 19. This man's going on a journey, a long journey, right? Now we read, after a long time, the Lord of those servants cometh and reckons with them. Jesus is going to leave them shortly. Is he going to return one day? Yeah. About 2,000 years has transpired, hasn't it? But he's going to return. After a long time, the Lord of those servants comes and reckons. Is it going to be a day of reckoning and accounting? And so he that had received 5 talents came and brought the other 5 that he had gained, saying, Lord, you delivered unto me 5 talents. I have gained beside them 5 talents more. Now notice, is this man, this 5-talent man, is he glad to see his Lord return? Is he glad to deliver to him what he's gained? Yeah. You remember what Paul tells Timothy in 2 Timothy when he's preparing to leave. He knows his death is near. I have fought a good fight. I have kept the faith. I finished my course. Henceforth there is laid up for me a crown that awaits the righteous. But not for me only, you remember he says, but for all them that love what? His appearing, his second coming. So should we be so ready, prepared, and looking forward to that day? Yeah. And if not, shouldn't we begin to do so? So, this man is delighted to see his Lord return. And what does the Lord have to say to him? Is he delighted to see him too? So he that had received 5 talents came and brought other 5, saying, Lord, you delivered unto me 5 talents. I have gained beside them 5 more. His Lord says, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a few things. I will make you ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of thy Lord. Will there be joy in heaven? Eternal joy, won't it? Can worship be joyous here? It should be, shouldn't it? Think of how many songs we sing that are joyful, that are praising. Sing and be happy. Be with me, Lord. I cannot live without thee. There's a great day coming. Are you ready? You know, in Romans 1, verse 16 and 17, just prior to that, in verse 15, as I recall, Paul wants to go to Rome, doesn't he? He's writing to the brethren at Rome, and he said, I want to come see you. I am ready to preach to you also. For I'm not ashamed of the gospel of God or Christ, for it is the power of God unto salvation. I am ready to preach. 1 Peter 3:15 tells us to be ready always to give an answer to any man that asks us for a reason for. Are we ready? Paul said, I'm ready. Can you think of a time when Paul wasn't ready? When he obeyed the gospel, in Acts chapter 9, he hits the ground running, doesn't he? And he's preaching. And he's teaching. He's ready. Jesus tells us, well done, good and faithful servant. Had this man, this 5-talent man, when Jesus said, well done, had he done well? When the Lord says we've done well, you can't get any higher compliment than that, can you? can we know that we're doing well here in this life ourselves? Yeah. If you walk in the light, as he is in the light, John tells us, 1 John 1, verse 7, we have fellowship one with another, and the blood of Christ cleanses us from all sin. Now, isn't that something that we ought to be happy, joyful, and glad to know? Jesus cares. So well done, good and faithful. What does it mean to be faithful? All right. True. Trustworthy. Is God faithful? Is Jesus faithful? Yeah. Can you count on what they say? When we sing, for instance, standing on the promises of Christ my King, can we be sure of those promises? Yes. Yes, we can be sure. Well done, good and faithful servant. Verse 22, he also that had received 2 talents came and said, Lord, you delivered to me 2. I have gained 2 other talents beside them. Is he happy to see his Lord? Is the Lord happy to see him? His Lord says, well done, good and faithful servant. Does he get the same recognition as the 5-talent man does? You've been faithful over a few things. I will make you ruler over many. Enter into the joy of your Lord. Then we read in verse 24, he which had received the 1 talent came and said, Lord, I knew that you are a hard man. Is it the case that sometimes we reveal more about ourselves in things we say than we really desired to? Sometimes by what we say. Lord, I knew you was a hard man. I knew that you are a hard man, reaping where you had not sown, and gathering where you had not planted. Now, what does that say about this man? What's his view of the Lord? He states it, doesn't he? Does he have a negative impression of the Lord? Yeah. Yeah. But isn't it interesting how Jesus responds? I knew you're a hard man, reaping where you hadn't sown, gathering where you hadn't planted. I was afraid. He said, I was afraid. Went and hid your talent in the earth. And, here's yours. His Lord answered and said to him, you're a wicked and slothful servant. You knew that I reap where I sowed not and gather where I have not planted. Now, does Jesus agree with this man? He's really not agreeing. No, I'm not like you're saying. But he's using his own logic or illogic, which you will, to say, in other words, if that's your view of me, then by that reason, you ought to have been really working. You see, sometimes what we say reveals a lot about us, doesn't it? Even though we may not recognize it. Was that the first or the second? Ooh, okay. I guess our time's up then. Well, we appreciate the presence of each one and your interest and participation. Well, the Lord said, wicked and slothful servant, and outer darkness, and the sentence pronounced is not good, is it? You know?
Wasn't well done, was it?
No, 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 he isn't. All right.
Hi, Mike Hickson here. Thank you so much for watching our worship service today. We're so glad that you took time out of your schedule to be a part of our service today. We'd love to invite you to come and be a part of our worship services every Sunday. We'd love to have you on Wednesday night as well. If you have a question or a comment, please feel free to contact us. Hope to see you right back here again next week. Until then, God bless.